This is Nancy Gauntz, and I'd like to welcome those who have been able to join us. We have a special program this evening, presentation by Stephen Stetson, the State Director for Planned Parenthood in Alabama. And his topic will be Reproductive Justice and Health Policy in Alabama, Past, Present, and Future.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it. And thank y'all so much for the invite tonight. I am excited to be here, and I'm going to try to share my screen. I threw together a couple of slides. Was there a question? Okay. if somebody can let me know if it works for me to, if the screen sharing works, and then I will proceed. I don't think I'll be able to see y'all, but let's see if I can make this presentation from the beginning. Okay. Does that work? Yep. Okay, great. So thanks for having me. I'll introduce myself just a little bit. I appreciate the intro, Kathy, and I'm a big fan of Nancy Muse and Megan Muse, who I know from my previous job. I'm from here. I'm from Alabama. I was born and raised down in Troy, and I live in Montgomery now. So I know this state pretty well. I got to my current position through being on the debate team, both in high school and college, and I was also a journalist by training. I was writing for my high school newspaper and my college newspaper at the University of Texas, where I became a senior associate editor of the newspaper, and originally thought I was going to grow up to be a journalist. And I did it for a couple of years before deciding that I was going to go to law school. I went to law school at the University of Alabama up in Tuscaloosa, and graduated from there back in '07 and took a job immediately here in Montgomery doing public policy advocacy type work. I knew I didn't really want to go work at a law firm, so I challenged myself to make my state a better place, and basically immediately became a lobbyist and a public policy advocate. I worked at an organization called Alabama Arise for almost 10 years. I was doing policy analysis, legislative testimony, speaking in a lot of church basements on everything ranging from public transportation to the death penalty. I was sort of the everything else guy. Some of y'all may remember when I was doing a presentation on payday loans. I was very involved in a wide number of topics that affect us here in Alabama. As Kathy mentioned, I went to the Sierra Club for a couple of years and was doing climate change, energy policy work. So I was really focused on clean energy policy and focused on the utility sector and that sort of work, trying to get fossil fuels off the electric grid. And so I can probably tell you more than you want to know about fracking and electric cars and all that stuff. But for the last 2 years, I have been in this position. I guess in October will be my 2-year anniversary. So I still feel a little bit new in this position, but I'm running Planned Parenthood's work here in Alabama. And I just threw in my bio there that I'm also a proud former League of Women Voters of Alabama board member. I did that for a number of years. And I just want to say at the beginning, not to butter y'all up or anything, but it really is important to me, the work that the League does. The League is a very important entity in this state, and the particular approach of the League as a nonpartisan, always doing your homework type of entity is really appreciated. I think there's a path forward in these highly polarized times, and I just wanted to thank y'all for your work as being League members, and I hope you're out there continuing to grow the League and make it stronger. So I just really appreciate the work that y'all do. So I'm honored to be here tonight. The photo is me and our former Georgia State Director with our national CEO at Planned Parenthood, Alexis McGill Johnson. She came to our annual fundraiser in Atlanta last year and gave a great presentation. So I want to, before I dive in, just tell you a little bit more about Planned Parenthood. This is an organization whose name I knew from the time I was a young high school debater, but I didn't know too much about how Planned Parenthood has worked over the history of things. So many of y'all may know the founding of the organization through a woman named Margaret Sanger. Obviously, Margaret Sanger and some of her co-workers have some baggage. A lot of organizations that are as old as Planned Parenthood have some baggage. So like Sierra Club was founded by John Muir. John Muir has some baggage, but as an organization that's been around for this long and has built up and accumulated this much political capital, this much economic capital, this much cultural cachet, and this many multi-generational members, we're grappling with that baggage. So Margaret Sanger was not an uncomplicated figure, but in many ways very heroic. And so we also lean into our history, and Planned Parenthood has been around for a long time. But what I really wanted to underscore here is that Planned Parenthood in Alabama is the oldest Planned Parenthood in the Southeast. We have been in Alabama since the year 1930, and I am an Alabama history guy. I'm really proud of Alabama in a lot of ways. Alabama's troubling in so many ways, but I also have leaned into our complex, beautiful, and challenging history. And Planned Parenthood started in Birmingham in 1930 when some physicians decided they were going to do some family planning effort outreach targeting at low-income populations. And what started as a Jefferson County-based thing quickly got folded into the Planned Parenthood brand and is now what we know as a national powerhouse organization, a major player in national party politics, a major contributor to U.S. Senate and presidential campaigns. So 2 more points here I just want to make before I lean into it is, in addition to sort of the famous national brand name recognition that we have, the organization is structured in regional affiliates. So some states have more than one affiliate. Florida, for example, has a couple of affiliates operating within the geographic boundaries of the state of Florida. We are the opposite. We have 3 full states inside our affiliate. So we are Planned Parenthood Southeast. That includes Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. So those are 3 states that have a lot in common. Maybe y'all know some of the political and cultural similarities that those states have. But when I have a weekly meeting with my fellow state directors, I'm talking to the people in Georgia and I'm talking to the people in Mississippi. So that's kind of how we're set up. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. And the final point is that we have not just the public policy and advocacy side of things, which is me, a lawyer, a registered lobbyist, doing the work that I do here at the State House in Montgomery, doing public advocacy campaigns, talking about litigation and suing and all the sort of things that you might imagine a public policy type of nonprofit does. But we are also a frontline provider of healthcare. So across the affiliate, all 3 of our states have healthcare centers in them. There's one in Mississippi, there's several in Georgia. And in Alabama, up until just a few months ago, we had 2 healthcare centers, one in Birmingham, one in Mobile. Unfortunately, and as we're about to talk a little bit more about it, we had to close our health center in Mobile for what we believe will be a temporary closure. We have not sold the building. We own the building down in Mobile, and we are intending to reopen it after we get a few more ducks in a row. But right now, we still do have a healthcare center that's open for business in Birmingham, and we do a lot of exciting frontline healthcare provisions. And that's new to me. I'm basically from the public policy world. And aside from my experience at Sierra Club, where we might partner with somebody to set up some solar panels or something, I had never been in an organization that is on a daily basis interfacing with the public, providing a service, which is a whole new complicated world of state oversight, licensing, regulations, doctors, nurses, admitting privileges. So I have learned a lot in the last 2 years about what it means to provide health care to the people in Alabama and all of the public policy issues wrapped around that. So we're going to dig in a little bit more, but I just wanted to really underscore, if there's anything that I leave y'all with that we need in the state of Alabama, it's to continue to keep our doors open. Even though our health centers are not providing abortion care anymore, we are still trying to be a healthcare provider in the state of Alabama. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about Planned Parenthood. I hope I'm not talking too fast, but I want to be sure that I leave a lot of time for questions at the end. I would love to just have an open conversation. Y'all always have such great ideas. The League of Women Voters, everybody's well read and thoughtful and willing to have tough conversations sometimes. So let's get into the meat of it a little bit. So you all know, and I'm not going to talk to you like you're a 5th grade class. You know that the Dobbs decision came down about a year ago and changed the world. But what I want to say is that things weren't great before Dobbs. When the Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the 2 cornerstones of federal jurisprudence that protected the right to abortion in the United States, things were not some, flower draped utopia here in the state of Alabama. And these are not facts that I need to belabor. I just did a little tweet thread on Twitter yesterday where I outlined a lot of this stuff. If any of y'all are on Twitter, feel free to give me a follow, and you can just scroll back down and look at some of the statistics that I was quoting. But you know these things in your heart. If you've even driven 5 minutes around the state of Alabama, you know that our infant and maternal mortality rates, I have this line about where they say, what's it like being from Alabama? When I say, well, we're at the top of the list of everything bad and the bottom of the list of everything good, what I mean by that is not just obesity and diabetes and stuff like that where we're at the top of the list, but also infant and maternal mortality lists. We are up at the top of those lists with the most number of infant deaths per 100 live births, et cetera, et cetera. It is bleak, y'all. And part of that equation is that as a state with only a couple of big cities and a lot of people who live in rural areas, part of that is the closure of rural hospitals. And so even before Dobbs overturned Roe, there was a lack of access to care. I was born and raised in a town called Troy, Alabama. There's still a hospital in Troy. I was born in that hospital. But there are a lot of towns like Troy whose hospitals are operating on razor thin margins and are in fact losing money every month. And that has got to be a bad feeling if you're a hospital administrator in one of those places and you've got all this fancy equipment and x-rays and MRI machines and all this stuff, and you're still bleeding the money out because people are not coming into the hospital like they used to and they don't have insurance like they used to. So let me just underscore that before Dobbs, things were still rough here in Alabama. There was an insurance crisis. That's why we had the Affordable Care Act passed under President Obama. There was a donut hole in which some people made a little enough money that Medicaid would cover of them, and some people made enough money that they could either buy insurance on the private market or they had their own insurance. But in the middle, between the very poor and the moderate to well-off people, there was the donut hole of coverage gap is what they called it. So that was going on. These are structural healthcare system problems. And as of course y'all know, after the Affordable Care Act created Medicaid expansion for increased money and revenue to go to these kind of hospitals to help deal with some of these indigent care folks, we refused to do it. The state of Alabama, just because it was from a Democratic president, said, we're not going to do it. We're not going to pony up the money and get the match to come down, and we're just not going to do it. We dug our heels in. So we could talk more about that if you want to. It's not an issue that I work on as much. I've not become Mr. Healthcare Policy guy. So I'm not as fluent in all of the ins and outs of whether Alabama may or may not expand Medicaid. I can talk a little bit about the rumors that I'm hearing around the State House about Blue Cross Blue Shield, and maybe they're going to have their own version of a plan. But the bottom line is, before the Dobbs decision, there were a lot of people who could not access the care that they needed. They could not take off work. They could not come. There was a stigma around abortion care that was just difficult to overcome, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why I am wanting to leave you with the impression that even before Dobbs, Roe created this, quote, right to an abortion that, under the privacy provisions of the U.S. Constitution, that a person who could get pregnant was free from government intervention into their private affairs, that this was between the pregnant person and their doctor. Well, for many people, they still couldn't access care. So that's really what I want to set up before we start talking about what goes next. And I also want to say that one of the consequences of a pre-Dobbs world was that the Alabama legislature, knowing that there was a U.S. Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade that prevented them from repealing the right to an abortion, they felt free, as they do this a lot, they said, let's just pass these laws anyway, and if they get struck down in court, so what? We're going to go back home. We're going to campaign. We're going to have our little speeches at the fish fry and at the church social and at the banquets. And we're going to give our little speeches about how we voted to overturn abortion and repeal abortion. And those darn federal government came in and they wouldn't let us do it because the federal courts kept striking down all of these laws that Alabama was trying to pass to restrict access to abortion. So I think it's important to remember that when Alabama's abortion ban was passed in 2019, it was enjoined and could not go into effect. It was essentially a paper tiger that was kept at bay by the existence of federal jurisprudence and Roe versus Wade. Why does that become important? Because once Dobbs happens and Roe is no longer the firewall between the federal judiciary and the Alabama legislature, all of those laws that Alabama had passed earlier immediately came into effect, including the 2019 ban. So we can talk more about that in a minute, but just know that in a pre-Dobbs era, the Alabama legislature was still shooting what at the time were blanks and have suddenly become very real pieces of Alabama's statutes and codes. And all the while, there was a concerted political movement operating in a multi-decade time horizon to put conservative judges on the federal judiciary, many of whom didn't even have that many conservative views, except that they believed that Roe v. Wade needed to be overturned. These were people for whom what they thought about Roe was in many ways a litmus test for whether the conservative movement would support them being a nominee for a federal judicial position. I probably don't need to tell y'all, these are federal judicial positions that are lifetime appointments. So you stick a 25 or a 35-year-old person into the federal bench, you're looking at possibly 50 or 60 years of these people being permanent members of our government. So the Federalist Society, being one of the main conservative groups, began, to use the parlance of the day, grooming young law students and putting them in positions to be nominated for federal positions and then getting them confirmed by the Senate. We can talk more about that if you want to, about the confirmation process in the U.S. Senate. But, and if you'll allow me a parenthetical here, that is why Planned Parenthood on Sunday just went public. So y'all are maybe hearing this for the first time, but on Sunday, like a couple of days ago, Planned Parenthood came public and announced that we are in favor now of judicial reform, adding more positions to the court and creating term limits on some of these federal judges. So we have finally, as an organization, said, y'all, the system is broken. These federal judges can't just sit up there until they become permanent lifetime appointees. So we have advocated for that in part because of this multi-generational approach. Now, I say all of this not to depress you, but to let you know that if we're talking about a world in which some of this stuff is going to move in the other direction, we need to have a big picture, long view. This didn't happen overnight. This happened as a result of people planning, and they were not only planning, not just this year, not just 2 years from now, not just 5 years from now, their own children picked up the mantle and continued this political advocacy. So in a world where we are always thinking about little media, boom, hit, boom, change the channel, flip, Twitter, short attention span theater, this is not that. These people were moving at a tectonic and glacial scale to change the body politic of the nation of the United States of America in order to have a long-standing right. For 50 years, this was the law of the land, and they were able to take it away through concerted political advocacy. So I just want to underscore that if you're thinking about what can we do to turn the ship around, this is not a ship that turns on a dime. This is a glacial tectonic movement, and so we need to channel the energy from the backlash into the same kind of time horizon that the other side was operating on. And I just want to say, one more thing before the Dobbs decision is that in the middle of COVID, we opened this brand new Birmingham Health Center that was a multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art abortion clinic. We did all kinds of stuff at our Birmingham Health Center. It is a beautiful building. If y'all have ever been in Birmingham or down on First Avenue, you can swing by. And it used to be, I think it used to be a skate park right there in downtown Birmingham. We have one of the finest state-of-the-art health centers across the country. It is beautiful. Opened in, I believe, 2019 or 2020, and then the Dobbs decision came and took away one of the main sources of revenue. But Planned Parenthood has been committed to the fight here in Alabama, and in fact, providing top-notch, state-of-the-art health care. It's awesome. It's a great center. You park around behind it so that the people clustered on the sidewalk screaming can't yell at the patients coming into the building because the building is between the sidewalk and the patient's access to the building. So it's all very, very nice. But just to let you know, we're keeping that open for now. But all right. I'm going to walk through this, and then I'm going to talk about the legislative session, and then I would love to hear from y'all. So I hope you're starting to percolate some questions for me. But obviously, this was, it's been a tough year, to say the least. It's been a tough year. I want to highlight one thing that you remember that before the Dobbs decision, there was a leak that came out of the Supreme Court that it was essentially a preview of the Dobbs decision. And it basically was what turned out to be Scalia's opinion there. But I want to take you back to the moment after the Dobbs decision really came out. And Representative Chris England, who I mentioned there on the slide, he's out of Tuscaloosa. He said something that I did not really realize, which is as a part of the legal landscape in a world where Dobbs was issued, putting the power back in the hands of the states, the federal injunction on Alabama's law was still in place, which meant that abortion in Alabama would have been legal but for a single old piece of the Alabama code that was passed a long time ago. I want to say it was passed back in like the 1930s or something like that. It's a really old misdemeanor statute that says that abortion was a criminal misdemeanor, which is, punishable by a $500 fine. But for this little criminal misdemeanor statute forbidding abortion would have been legal in Alabama for just a very little brief part of time before the courts came back and released the injunction on Alabama's 2019 ban. So pretty quickly, Alabama's ban got freed up from the federal courts, and abortion of all kinds immediately became illegal in Alabama. So we stopped performing them in Mobile, we stopped performing them in Birmingham, and as did the other 3 clinics in the state of Alabama. So before Dobbs, there were 5 clinics in the state of Alabama. There were R2, Mobile and Birmingham. There was one here in Montgomery. There was one in Tuscaloosa, and there was one in Huntsville. So we can talk a little bit more about the landscape, but essentially what we at Planned Parenthood say is there were 2 Planned Parenthoods and 3 of what we would call the independent clinics. So we can talk more about the landscape between Planned Parenthood and independent clinics, but I just wanted to lift that up because when I get to the part about the legislative session, I'm going to tell you a little bit more. That HB 7, it's a little preview for the next slide. So Alabama's law, the 2019 ban that was signed into law by Kay Ivey, is among the worst in the sense that there are no exemptions in Alabama for rape and incest. If the pregnancy is a product of a sexual assault, something non-consensual, you are still not free to go and get an abortion. But in some ways, of the bans that exist, and other southeastern states are somewhat in our same shoes, and there are other states that have no loopholes for rape and incest, but ours does have a medical safety of the mother provision, which in some ways is better than other places. There are places that don't even have the safety of the mother provision, and that ours basically allows doctors a lot of latitude to decide in the case of something like an ectopic pregnancy where the mother is going to be injured or die from this, to go in and essentially clean out the uterus. So there is, it's bad. The bottom line is that it's bad in Alabama. But I did hear a speaker. I was down in Destin this past week, and I was at the annual meeting of all of the obstetricians and gynecologists, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, ACOG. Y'all should look them up. ACOG is a great organization, and it's all the obstetricians and gynecologists, as you might expect. So they were having their annual meeting down at the beach, and one of the speakers down there does work in a bunch of different states, and she was saying that Alabama's law, of the states that have a complete and total ban, ours at least has some exemptions in it. So for us, what it basically meant is an immediate stop to what had at that point been a pretty major source of income. It also meant that we were not in a position to help people go to other states and acquire care in jurisdictions where it was legal, what we would call access states. We were prohibition state, and there were other states that were access states. So somebody couldn't call our health center and say, hey, I'm pregnant, I don't want to keep it, and then we could not help them book a plane ticket to California, for example. And we could talk more about that why, but it was an immediate impact. And the reason why is conspiracy laws. So I studied criminal defense when I was in law school. So I thought I was going to go be a public defender and work on death penalty cases and murders and things like that. But the bottom line here is that if I help you go rob a bank, it doesn't matter whether I go with you to the bank and stick the gun in the teller's face. If I'm helping you by giving you the blueprints and the plans and telling you how to do it, I also can be arrested for conspiracy and aiding and abetting the crime. Well, same way, if something is illegal in Alabama, we could get in trouble for aiding and abetting and helping people to do it. Now, would we lose that case in court? I don't know, but our internal risk management attorneys were like, we're not going to risk it. So we're not going to be putting together travel packages for people and paying for their hotels to fly to other places. And so we have been encouraging people to be careful in the way they talk about the existing law, and those people that are dealing with pregnancy issues do need to be careful, because all it takes is one district attorney or the attorney general who wants to make an example of everybody to suddenly make you have a very bad day and maybe a very bad couple of months. And so even if you end up beating the charges, nobody wants to be the criminal defendant in these cases. And that could be a game changer. So I'm happy to talk more about that. But for now, generally speaking, when people call us, we are keeping our lips zipped about how exactly to access abortion care. Now, there are websites out there that you can Google that basically will tell you what the law is in each state, and you can type in your name, or not your name. These are confidential websites. I want to underscore that. But you type in your jurisdiction, basically. Where are you? What services are you looking for? And the website will basically help you figure out a path forward for what kinds of medical care you can get access to, which is obviously sounds like something out of a dystopian science fiction novel that we can't help you, but the computer algorithm can. And I think there are a lot of people who are afraid of the slip of the tongue that I just made, which is, is this confidential? Am I going to get in trouble for entering my private personal information in there? There's a lot of people who don't have access to computers. They don't know about these websites. And so it's obviously a terrible situation. One other thing I want to touch on here is, while we're talking about overzealous prosecutors, is some comments that happened. Let's see, I guess that was back in the fall. It's been a couple of months now. So about 2004 or so, Alabama passed a law known as the Chemical Endangerment Law, which was designed to protect people who were going into meth labs. And what the Alabama legislature was worried about was a pregnant person who was in there cooking meth for their significant other. And they were in there cooking meth. The pregnant person was exposed to all these chemicals, and so was the fetus inside of them. And so they said, no, this is terrible for these unborn people to be exposed to the dangerous chemicals in a meth lab. We need to pass a law that would allow us to prosecute not just the people for possession of meth, not just the people who are helping to manufacture the meth, but they are also endangering this unborn child. And there were also, there's tons of other laws like that about protecting, ramping up criminal penalties for people who are pregnant. So this national news that happened a couple of months ago was that our Attorney General had announced that he was going to begin initiating prosecutions for people in Alabama that were taking medicine. They were taking abortion pills, and that he thought that maybe one approach that he could bring to the court would be to use the chemical endangerment statute to prosecute people who were, for example, maybe ordering abortion pills online and then taking them, and then he would be able to then lock them up and take them to jail. So ultimately, after a national outcry, Steve Marshall, our Attorney General, backed off of that. And so there are a lot of public comments saying, no, this was a big misunderstanding. What we really meant to say was we were going to prosecute all the pharmacies who might prescribe this medication. If the pharmacy, if Walgreens or CVS is going to fulfill your prescription, we're going to prosecute those people. We're going to arrest them and take them to jail. But under no circumstances do we want to prosecute people who are pregnant. We want to protect those people. Nobody wins by the pregnant person going to jail and giving birth in jail or whatever. So the reason why I mention that is not just to say this is the caliber of legal minds that we have making decisions in this state, but it's going to be really relevant on the next two slides when I talk about the legislative session. So let's get to those. here we are, the legislative session. We are probably going to go until early June. It could possibly go until maybe June the, I don't know, 14, 15, possibly as late as June 19, but only because sometimes they will take a break between legislative day number 29 and legislative day number 30. They can only meet 30 days, so legislative day number 30 is their last day. Sometimes they will take a 10-day break in there in order to watch and see if Governor Ivey is going to veto anything. Then they could come back in after she vetoes it to override her veto. Now, I don't know for sure that they're going to do that, but the takeaway from this conversation ought to be we are nearing the end of the legislative session. So I'm happy to talk about where we're at, or whatever, if y'all have more questions about that. But if you'll indulge me, I'm just going to run through a couple of bills really quick, things that have been filed this session, and then I would love to take any questions that y'all may have. So here are some bills, and I understand if your eyes are already glazing over from the numbers. That's how it is. I tried to think of a cute, fun, sexy photo to put on here, but let's just grind through these numbers together, and I'm happy to answer questions about them. So I mentioned HB 17 earlier, and Representative England from Tuscaloosa wanted to repeal that misdemeanor provision just to take it off the books. Look, abortion would still be illegal in the state of Alabama. But what Representative England was trying to do is say, if it's true that y'all don't want to prosecute pregnant people, then you should have no objection to taking this criminal misdemeanor statute off the books. Because the only thing this statute is good for is prosecuting people directly. The pregnant person would be the criminal defendant in the case. So let's get rid of this old, outdated law. And of course, this bill has not gone anywhere because the question is, are you really serious about whether you do or don't want to prosecute pregnant people? We had two bills from Senator Figures that you'll see there, 34 and 35. One would have repealed the abortion ban altogether, and one would have added some rape and incest exemptions. Senator Figures, Democrat from Mobile. These are good bills, but they obviously did not even get a hearing in committee. But they are sort of placeholders to say, this is what could happen if we were maybe to want to turn the ship of state around. HB 50 by Representative Estes. Would have allowed people to claim a third trimester pregnancy as a dependent for tax purposes. So more of like what I was saying about you take somebody who's pregnant and you just start affording full personhood rights to the fetus. That bill has not advanced, fortunately, but y'all should be aware that that's happening. There's a small, I don't know why there's two X's there after Representative Powell's name, but HB 208 is a bill that would give people, that's not right. I will correct that slide before we share those out. HB 208 is one that would give people a tax credit if they made a contribution to a crisis pregnancy center, which are those places that you might see one outside of Planned Parenthood clinic. They used to drive a bus and park it in front of our building, and when people would try to come into our healthcare center to receive an abortion, they would say, no, come in here first, and we'll give you some free advice. And they would sit them down in a chair, and they would give them an ultrasound, and they would say, don't you want to keep this baby? Here, have a Bible, and let us give you some health care and make you feel awful about the decisions you're trying to make. So that's what crisis pregnancy centers are around the state to this day. You might see a couple of signs that say, are you pregnant? Let's talk to you about adoption. So anyway, they wanted to give people tax credits for donating money to those. But the one I really wanted to zero in on, and this is my last slide. I'm happy to take questions after this, but 454 was introduced last week, and Representative Yarbrough would basically move personhood, would, as I said, redefine personhood as, I believe it says, any fertilized egg. So all of the in vitro fertilization places around the state are not very happy that their tanks full of eggs would be defined as people, but moves abortion into the homicide statute, which would allow district attorneys to prosecute people who had any kind of negative pregnancy outcome. I mean, it would be up to the jury to decide, did they self-manage an abortion, or did they just have a miscarriage? Well, let's ask the jury. Let's put this person on trial for murder and see what happens. And so that bill did have a couple of co-sponsors, and it's been assigned to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And our goal for the remainder of this legislative session is to hope and pressure the Senate Judiciary Committee not to even let this thing come up for the light of day. Now, I'll say, in my professional opinion, having done this for a while, there's probably not enough time for this bill to become law before the session runs out, but there could be. There's legally enough time for this thing to get scheduled up in Senate Judy. They pass it out. They could have a floor debate. They could pass it on the floor. They could throw it over to the Senate, and they could ram this thing through in the closing minutes of the session. So legally, we're not out of the woods yet. But more significantly, what I'm hopeful is that this thing will be smashed so far beyond recognition that it won't even come back next year. But that's the way it is around the legislature. If a bill gets introduced, it's almost like a trial balloon. They'll see who the opponents are, how far it's going to go. And then next year, they'll come prepared with answers to all of the opposition's arguments, and they'll try to advance the ball a little further. And if it doesn't pass then, they'll try to get it a little further next time. And that's often how the sausage is made. So I would encourage all of you, keep an eye on HB 454 and Representative Yarbrough, who just goes the opposite of what Steve Marshall was forced to backpedal and say, no, we don't want to prosecute pregnant people. Representative Yarbrough and his co-sponsors have said, yes, we do want to prosecute pregnant people, and that's where we are now. Final couple of points here about the state legislative session. Just keep an eye on other options for reform. Just because abortion is illegal in Alabama, Planned Parenthood is not going away. We want to make some improvements to the state's sex education laws. We are trying to get feminine hygiene products to low-income high school students and expand a pilot program that we got passed last year. We want to be sure that low-income high school students are not having those moments in class where they have to leave and there's an embarrassment and stigma around not having tampons and feminine hygiene pads and things like that. I think there's a lot of progress that we can make there. And I also think that what's coming is ultimately probably going to be a war on birth control, a war on women being in control of their own bodies, a war on in vitro fertilization. All of these things are possibly right targets. We are also doing coalition work on all the anti-gay and anti-trans bills. We saw an attempt to ban drag queen performances. There was a huge march that I was a part of this morning in Montgomery. I don't know what the numbers were, but it was among one of the biggest protest rallies I had ever seen. And we all marched from the Alabama Supreme Court up to the old Capitol building and did some chanting on the steps of the old Capitol, and then went around the corner to the State House. That is a hot issue. It is obviously a premier culture war issue where people are sort of following in the steps of DeSantis with Don't Say Gay and all this stuff, banning divisive concepts from being taught in our schools. So even though the abortion issue is not on the front burner, there's a lot of other stuff that we continue to be working on. And my final comment is send me an email. I'm honored to be here with y'all tonight, and I'm happy to talk about any of this stuff, where we are, what can be done. But if Megan or Kathy or Nancy or one of y'all want to kind of take some questions, I'm happy to field them from anybody who wants to ask about any parts of it. And once I make that one correction to my presentation, I'm happy to share all the slides with y'all as well. So I just appreciate y'all having me here tonight.
Why don't we have people put their questions in the chat, Stephen, and then I can read them. Is that okay? Is that good?
Wonderful.
Okay.
I hope that covered what y'all were envisioning.
Perhaps it would be good just to let people raise their hands and speak.
I see one of the people on the phone, the 256 number, has a question if you want to come off mute. Status of mifepristone. Oh, there we got a couple of questions coming in. Nancy, do you want to field those, or do you leave it to me to answer?
Stephen, if you want to go ahead and do the chat, look at it yourself, that's fine, however you wish to proceed.
Cool. So the first question, and 256 on the phone, if you want to come off mute, I saw your hand first.
Well, that's fine. I was just curious what's going on with that right now with the abortion pill.
So, great question. It is one of the hot issues of the day. There are two main pharmaceuticals that are used for causing what we call a medication abortion. I think y'all should know that the other side has taken to calling them chemical abortions, which sounds so much worse. Mifepristone is a pill that the FDA approved more than 20 years ago and has been on the market, safely consumed by people for the entire time. that it's been approved by the FDA. It is literally safer than Tylenol. It has fewer adverse effects than any of the pills that we are constantly taking. Viagra, you name it. Mifepristone is a safe, tested medication. But what happened is some folks filed a federal lawsuit. They selected the jurisdiction that they thought would be most friendly. They found a Trump-appointed judge out in Amarillo, Texas, and said, this will be the place where we file our lawsuit. And that federal judge finally, after a lot of anticipations, issued the ruling that we were basically expecting, saying that mifepristone had not gone through the proper approval process at the FDA and therefore had to be taken off the market. Now, interestingly, because this was coming and we knew it was coming, a federal judge at the same time on the same day issued a ruling out of the state of Washington preventing the federal government, preventing the FDA from complying with that court's decision. So essentially what we have what we in the legal community call a circuit split. The circuit down in Texas was saying one thing, the circuit up in Washington was saying the opposite thing. So ultimately, this is going to have to be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, before your heart sinks to the bottom of your stomach and you say, oh, no, not this Supreme Court, they're terrible. They are. In many ways, they are terrible. And if none of you took Clarence Thomas on a hunting trip, then you might feel like your interests are not being considered. Well, what has basically happened is that they have put everything on pause and said, they're going to have to hear more from both sides. And so right now, mifepristone is still available. In a world where it is taken away, in a world where the other side successfully argues that the FDA did not go through the proper process and the whole thing has to start over again. And I should add, the pharmaceutical companies are furious about this because if this is allowed to stand, it means all of the drugs that the pharmaceutical companies have been getting approved all these years may be in question. And so a multi-billion-dollar industry, I'm going to say probably a multi-trillion-dollar industry, big pharma is not to be trifled with. They are concerned that a disruption to the pharmaceutical approval process could endanger some of their most profitable products. So they have filed some legal briefs saying, just leave it alone. So we're going to find out. We're going to find out what's going to happen. But for now, it's still legal. If mifepristone were to go away overnight, there is still another drug that can be taken that can cause an abortion that is not subject to the current ruling. And so you can imagine that the other side will then move their focus to that. And there is still going to be a debate to come about whether a legally approved FDA drug can be sent through the U.S. Postal Service. That is going to be an interesting debate, and the DOJ has said, yes, look, the Postal Service cannot be infringed upon by states like Alabama that, just don't want it to come in the mail. If somebody gets on the internet and they order something and it comes through the U.S. Postal Service, who is the state of Alabama to say? But there are going to be some more fights about that. But for now, the status quo prevails, and we're going to have some additional court cases. So keep your eyes on the headlines.
Currently, can a woman in Alabama take a prescription to an Alabama CVS store and get No, I didn't think so.
Unfortunately, no. The big pharmacy chains have said they're not going to comply, but in prohibition states because they don't want to run afoul of it. So
right. Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and we're not allowed to dispense it either. I see a question from Connie. Is Planned Parenthood still able to bill Medicaid for family planning? So we are going through the process. This was one of the things that shocked me the most about Planned Parenthood's healthcare delivery system is I did not know what all was involved in becoming a Medicaid provider, what all was involved in becoming a Blue Cross Blue Shield provider. Now, y'all may know that Blue Cross Blue Shield is the largest segment of health insurance of any market segment in the nation. So Blue Cross Blue Shield in Alabama controls something like between 90 and 92% of all people who have insurance. So they are a juggernaut. If you don't take Blue Cross Blue Shield, you're going to have a hard time finding people, if somebody's not going through the military with TRICARE or maybe a couple of other places use Aetna or some of these other things, but it's mostly they're the only game in town. And like like Medicaid, you got to go through steps to become a credentialed insurer. So the current answer, Connie, unfortunately, is no. Under my leadership, I have prioritized this, saying if we're going to keep the doors open in Birmingham, we need to become a Medicaid provider and take private healthcare insurance. There is some concern that you can't take, that Medicaid can't execute a contract if you provide abortions anywhere, which I was like, well, we don't anymore in Alabama, but legally our entity is Planned Parenthood Southeast, which does provide abortions in Georgia. Georgia has a 6-week policy, so that may be more than I ought to say on a recording, but that's where we are now. Kathy says, can I read questions? Yes, I'm sorry. I will do my best to read these questions before I answer them. Question from Kathy, is there any data that shows the impact of Dobbs on maternal mortality in Alabama? And the short answer is no. The maternal mortality data that I saw was quoting 21 data. So it's going to be a minute before the system incorporates a post-Dobbs world into the maternal and infant mortality decisions. But the thing we want to watch and be really attuned to is especially the people that are self-managing abortions, what happens to them, and what happens to providers who have someone come in and say, I tried to self-manage my abortion and it didn't go well, I'm still bleeding, can you help? And are those doctors then going to be afraid to provide immediate care to someone for fear of criminal prosecution? That's the crux of the next thing there. And I can't speak for the other healthcare centers, but I know people are grappling with it. Lee Bancroft says, I want to share what we are working on at FemSouth, which is a 6-part investigative series looking at the impact of Roe in Alabama. Here's the link to our landscape episode, and everybody who is on the chat ought to go and check out this podcast link. They are working on their 2nd episode with Dr. Foster from the Turnaway study. They want to get the word out, so that looks like a great podcast. Thank you for sharing that, Lee. Kathy says, has there been any specific examples like in Texas of people whose health has been harmed by Dobbs impacting doctors? I think I may have just answered that one. Yes is the answer to that question. And there are people coming in, especially in the world of self-managed abortions, where they don't know what's going on and there's real fear. How far would a pregnant person in Alabama have to travel for an abortion? It's a good question that is, I think, in play at this very moment, because I just saw minutes before logging on to this that you may have seen that in North Carolina, the governor vetoed their abortion ban. The legislature is now going to go back and override the governor's veto. And I believe that I don't want to get this wrong, but I believe the Senate overrode the veto, and now it's going to go to the North Carolina House. So if that happens, then North Carolina will have a new abortion ban. I don't know all the details there, so I'm out over my skis a little bit. I don't want to get these things wrong. I will tell you that Planned Parenthood as an organization has done a lot of investments along the Illinois border, so that a lot of people in Missouri, which is a surprisingly reactionary state on this issue, are crossing the border into Illinois. And there's just all the, it's almost like buying lottery tickets when you cross over into Florida, and there's just a bunch of places right there on the border. That may be what we end up looking at in a post-Dobbs landscape, is the access states just set up healthcare centers right on the border, so that as soon as you cross into Illinois, you can get access. That's crazy to imagine. I think this is also from Kathy. Can you talk about what Tuberville is doing to hold up military promotions because of federal access to abortion care? So yeah, this is a great question, and it's something that's really bothered me about Senator Tuberville's approach. So Senator, right now, if you're in the military and you get promoted, and a lot of promotions in the military have to go through the Senate for confirmation. Now, traditionally, the Senate does these things in bulk, and they'll approve 200 military promotions at a time, because as you can imagine, a lot of people, a lot of promotions, it's really just a formality. And they will just say, Senate resolution, blah, 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 all in favor, boom, it all goes through. Like, there's never really been somebody to kind of throw a wrench in it this way. So Senator Tuberville is really upset because the military has said a lot of our people don't want to be stationed in states where they can't access health care. And so we are going to continue to respect the previous policy. And so military health care is going to continue to cover it. And they were even willing to take people to, if you were stationed at Fort Rucker or you were stationed in Huntsville, they would help you go from your job and take time off and go to a state where you could access health care. And Senator Tuberville didn't like that. And so he said, I am going to hold up every single promotion in the U.S. military until I get this resolved. And so as a result, these people not only are not getting their bump in pay to a higher pay grade, they can't transfer. If they say we're going to make you a colonel and you have to deploy to Germany, they can't go because they aren't legally a colonel yet. And so everyone is furious at Tuberville. Even Republicans like McConnell have said this is a bridge too far. You are crazy. And so what I have heard as a rumor, and we shall see, I don't want to be the Mr. Rumor guy, but I heard that it may implicate whether Huntsville gets Space Command from Colorado or not, is because if they think that we are in a place where someone is willing to hold hostage every single military promotion on the basis of some weird ideological beliefs about abortion, maybe this isn't the kind of place that we need to have in a new expanded multi-billion-dollar facility. And Kathy, I see your hand up. Since that's your question, did you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, I did. I was just remembering that I actually sent him a letter. I sent him an email about this, and I pulled up his response, and it was, he basically said that on February 16th, DOD announced a new policy to fund travel and paid time off for service members and their dependents seeking elective abortions. And then it goes on, and he goes down and says, according to a third-party study, under the new policy, the number of abortions subsidized by taxpayers through the DOD would increase to 4,100 annually, 205 times the number of abortions last year. I'm holding general and flag officer nominations until this immoral and unconstitutional policy is rescinded. And my holds have no impact on military readiness or operations, unlike the military wasting time and resources to coordinate travel for abortions, all of which does hurt military readiness. I'm just like, I just thought I would share that with you because it is maddening that we get that totally unapologetic.
And I should ask before I take more questions, Megan or Nancy or someone, do we have a hard stop at 7 or keep going? Okay, cool. I will just say one last thing about Tuberville and the military is y'all have probably also saw his comments about white nationalists being in the military. And I think that drew a lot of criticism and is really, I'm sure he has been boxed into a corner. And I don't know, we could talk when I'm not being recorded about other things that I've heard, but it's not going well, even in a state that honors and respects the military like Alabama. My father, who just passed away, was a veteran, and I find the holding of the promotions just absolutely disgraceful. Freya asks, what about Planned Parenthood and contraception? Are pills most commonly prescribed? What about injectables? What about emergency contraception? Well, all very good questions. It's important to note that EC, emergency contraception, we call it EC, is not the abortion pill. That's not mifepristone. So yeah, Planned Parenthood, I think this is really important, and it's a great question. I appreciate it, Freya. We started out doing this. This was our bread and butter. Even when Planned Parenthood, in a pre-Roe world, we were, helping people plan their parenthood, which meant providing access to reproductive health care in all of its forms, including contraception. And we need to continue to stick to the basics. And in a place like Alabama, where you have a lot of this is why I'm so interested in the sex education stuff,
we'll send a million people.
Is that in a world where the sex education standards often talk about things like abstinence only, there is even pushback on the question of provision of contraception. And so I told y'all I was just down at the OBGYN meetings. It was funny. I had a bowl full of condoms and stuff like that on the table. And, these are doctors. They're not necessarily the same kind of spring break crowd that we might traditionally try to reach. And let me just put parenthetical there and say that we do have 7 or 8 college campus chapters of Planned Parenthood. So up in Huntsville, we've got Alabama A&M, we've got Tuscaloosa, we've got Auburn, we've got UAB, we've got Tuskegee. We're continuing to work to try to get people in Mobile. I would love it if somebody had a connection with Troy, but those are the young people who are the best places. We wanted to throw condoms off of Mardi Gras floats down in Mobile. We are continuing to do that work. So yes and yes to contraception. We have a sex educator based at our Birmingham Health Center, so they have age-appropriate sex education that shows how to put on a condom, all those kinds of things. Are pills most commonly prescribed? Yes, I think as far as prescription goes, yes. I don't have the stats on that. And injectables, I don't know. I'm a little out of my depth there as far as what is most commonly used, but it is a major priority. We are continuing to push. And let me just say one more thing about the legislation and Alabama's sex ed curriculum, which is that we want to see consent added to the sex ed curriculum. It is something that a lot of young people do not fully understand, that they are coming to sexual experiences with weird ideas. And I think just some basics about consent being part of it, not just here's what your body is and how it works, but also here's the basics on consent. We would think that would be a bipartisan message that people would not be opposed to, but you would be surprised. Kathy asked how many states in the South have banned abortion. Basically, all of them have a major restriction. I mean, a ban is a tough thing to describe, and it depends on, of course, how you describe the South. South Carolina and South Carolina and regular Virginia are sort of anomalies at the moment. As I mentioned about North Carolina, they're in flux at the moment. West Virginia's prohibition state. So it's basically all of the Southeast. I wish I could share this map that I'm looking at with you, but it's essentially the familiar, all the SEC states are in the restricted or banned. Georgia is not all illegal. I think it's 6 weeks in Georgia. So that's very hard. It's very hard to know even that you are pregnant within that 6 week time frame. But basically, yeah, it's split like you would expect. Illinois, Indiana, Ohio still available. Virginia up through Pennsylvania, all of New England are access states. Janine, an excellent musician, says, wouldn't these terrible anti-abortion laws affect prenatal care as well? So docs won't want to treat any woman who is pregnant. Yes, I think that is true. There are other reasons why doctors don't want to treat people, including access to insurance and things like that. And I got a new appreciation for that down at the OBGYN conference this past week. And so there is a rich-poor gap between the people who are getting the expensive fertility treatments and all that stuff versus the teen mom who's, pregnant in high school or whatever from a low-income family on Medicaid. Yes, it does. It does affect it, especially if this kind of redefinition, if 454, that homicide bill passes, redefining personhood even more so. But it's a great point. And the fear among doctors is real because they just want to know what to do. These are not policy people. They just want a predictable landscape of we can do these things up to this point in time, and beyond that, they want it being simple. So there is tremendous fear in the medical community. And yeah. Let's see, Freya says, who did the study? Which study are we talking about? Freya, are you on? Can you come off mute and clarify?
Mute here. Kathy, the letter you got from Tuberville said he was citing a study by a third party.
He did not tell me.
He did not tell. We should find out.
Yeah. It'd be good.
I don't think that's too much to ask a sitting U.S. Senator.
No. Yeah, we should always do that on principle, right? To get him to cite his sources.
Final question here from Lee is working on the sex ed curriculum in Baldwin County. Yes, Lee puts an email address in there. I hope y'all that are on the chat will check and email Lee if you want to talk about sex ed standards. I mean, let me just say this about that, which is it was before my time at Planned Parenthood, but there was a victory at the state legislature in Montgomery when they got homosexuality stripped out of the state sex ed curriculum. For a while, it said officially in the state curriculum, homosexuality is an immoral and illegal lifestyle behavior, or something like that, to the effect of that. And they got that removed. They successfully got it deleted, saying, look, and the Supreme Court has said these, gay people can get married. It's not illegal to be gay, but so this needs to come out, and it did. It was a win, even in a very conservative environment. So that's what kind of gives me some optimism for this consent thing. Is maybe reasonable heads can prevail. Now the bad thing is that the climate has changed so much that all this talk about critical race theory and groomers and the toxic conversations around how we teach our young people has made this more of a minefield than it even used to be. So even if you go in equipped with a bunch of statistics about how abstinence only doesn't work, it's just as you think about strategies to do this work, and I have not yet fully mapped out who might be a legislative champion on these issues. I want to find some conservative, maybe educator-minded folks that can help us frame this message out. But it's not as easy as even it maybe used to be. But I also think maybe the winds will change again, and maybe we can get this stuff done. It's worth remembering that when the state puts something in the curriculum, it doesn't require them to teach it necessarily. It just sort of sets up some parameters. And so it's better than nothing. I think we could get some consent stuff in there, and it would give teachers a place to begin the conversation in their health class. We can make sure it's all age appropriate. There is good stuff out there that is appropriate. It's age appropriate ways to talk about sex education. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat. If anybody wants to come off or offer some more thoughts, I threw my email in the slides, and I am always open to hearing from y'all. I love, as I said, the league and the work y'all do, and AAUW and all these other organizations. They are not only important to me; they were important to my mom, I want to keep this conversation going. I think even in a state like Alabama, where abortion is kind of that third rail conversation, it's really polarizing. Some people are even single issue voters on this. There is other stuff we can work on. And I think part of my challenge at Planned Parenthood is going to be to carve a path forward for a post-Dobbs era. And I would love to partner with y'all and the work that you do. Thank y'all so much. Megan or Nancy, any closing words from y'all?
Well, yes, I didn't want this to close because this has been so wonderful. And the questions that were asked were also wonderful. And let's just ask one more time. Did everybody get a chance to ask? We still have a minute or two if anybody else has a question. Stephen, this has been so informative, and you did a superb job, and we're so grateful to you. I can't say this has been fun, though, but, knowledge is power, right? And there is hope. Is it Ed Markey's bill that about expanding the Supreme Court? Maybe that will help if that could happen, but that's just my thought off the top of my head in closing with all of this.
Yeah, I don't know if that can pass or not, but I will tell you that our position that we went public with this week was not only to expand the court, but also to create term limits. And one of the important things, and maybe just this little part could be sectioned off, and I say this as a lawyer, forum shopping and venue shopping is a real problem. So when I talked about them going to this Texas venue because they knew that the judge was receptive, that's not right. You should not get to choose your playing field for a legal challenge. You should take whatever judge you happen to get wherever you file the suit. And I think there may be an opportunity to at least restrict the venue shopping part of this federal lawsuit. There's no reason why that needed to start in Amarillo. They incorporated a nonprofit in Amarillo just for the purpose of filing the lawsuit. So I think maybe people understand that's not how the court system is supposed to function, but we'll see. I'm very curious as to what kind of traction these overall judicial reform questions are gonna get. And I think even if the other side isn't opposed to it on its own merits. I think that there is a certain extent to which it's going to be framed as, oh, you people can't win, so now you're going to change the rules. And so in a world where we're not hitting enough home runs, we're going to scoot the fences in a little bit. That offends people's basic sense as well. So I don't know. I'm very curious, and I'm very excited to see where this may go.
Nancy Gauntz, are you there? Do you want to say some closing words? Our president is Nancy Gauntz, Shoals League. Well, I will just go ahead and say then I'm so happy to have everyone here today, and we must do this again. I mean, maybe you all can have Stephen back for your local leagues, and you know, then we'll have a broader audience. And this is just the beginning, Stephen, of this wonderful information you have for, you know, this very important subject. So you all remember that. You've got Stephen's email address, so it's in the chat, right? So make a note of his email, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate you.